So finally, we have Stephen Smith, who is a suicide prevention peer worker. Stephen has his own lived and living experience of suicidality. He has listened to and reflected on dozens of people's stories and will share his personal thoughts on what support people living through suicidality want. Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you. I want to thank Being for this opportunity. And as I begin my talk, I note my comments are my personal observations. They do not represent the opinions of any organisation I may be employed by or associated with. Across my life, I've had the experience of being a carer for, bereaved by, or providing services to suicidal people. Today, however, I will be focusing on lived and living experience of suicide. I define this as having thoughts, plans, or actions related to wanting to kill myself. I've had these experiences since 1980, but due to the stigma and discrimination around wanting to kill myself, which can be described as suicidism, I first reached out for assistance in 2018, some 38 years later. I was on my way to putting my thoughts into action, but that day I did something different. I stopped and phoned a friend. The call didn't go as well as I'd hoped. My thoughts and experiences were framed as emotional blackmail. You may be able to imagine my distress and aloneness at that time. In that moment, my lifelong intuition about how unsafe it was to speak about the thoughts of killing myself were confirmed. 3 years later, I became a suicide prevention peer worker, and my journey with suicide was outed to my friends. I discovered I wasn't the only one experiencing these things. I've talked with friends, associates and clients about their experiences of wanting to kill themselves. And a key message that has been burned into my brain from these talks is safety is critical. We need places that we define as safe in which to discuss wanting to kill ourselves. Help. If they feel unsafe and at risk, they keep themselves safe by telling a very heavily edited version of their story. People tell enough to get a little bit of help, but only enough, because they want to avoid an involuntary rescue. Or they simply avoid altogether engaging with services or people who may call 000. I believe the suicide prevention sector is yet to adequately listen to our concerns. Let me illustrate this by my mate Bill's story. He doesn't want an involuntary rescue. He chooses to say no to police, ambulance, locked wards or medication. He would rather choose death than not have power, control or choice. He would like to reach out to a hotline where he's not at risk of an involuntary rescue. There are none. If he was in the US, he would have options of reaching out maybe to something like Trans Lifeline or other services if he belonged to a minority group. Given he has no supports, the journey to killing himself is a certainty. This now means several things for Bill. He'd love to have people along on the journey with him. He'd like to be able to say appropriate goodbyes and have a safe end-of-life medical procedure. This medically aided dying process is available to some people in Australia, but not to those of us with suicide or mental health issues. He'd also now need to know, well, what's the most effective, painless, less traumatic way to die? He notes that the suicide prevention sector is making it harder for him to access this information. This is likely to mean less effective or more violent means. If he's unsuccessful, he risks an ongoing life of disability. He would like to be associated or accompanied, by his close friends. Suicide legislation places them at risk of prosecution if they're involved. As a good friend, he would decide to die alone by uncertain means and probably violent ones, and he worries about the impact that his death may have on the public. If he dies, aspects of his story will not be reported. Means are not reported by the media. He actually wonders, how will the public become aware that the suicide prevention sector is actually covering up the horrendous pathway that has been left to him? Stressed not so much by the thoughts of killing himself as by the pathway left open to him by the sector. This is why he has been happy to actually have himself identified by his real name today. So what do people who are having thoughts, plans or actions related to wanting to kill themselves want? A number of key things. But I'm out of time. Thank you for listening.